Over the last week, we have put in place additional consequences that we can impose on the Russians if we do not see actual improvement of the situation on the ground. And we are coordinating now with our European allies. My hope is that we actually do see follow-through over the next several days. But I don't think, given past performance, that we can count on that. I think I've been very clear that military options are not on the table in Ukraine, because this is not a situation that would be amenable to a clear military solution.
Well, after 7 hours of talks in Geneva, diplomats with the U.S., EU, Ukraine, and Russia agreed on a bit of a deal, saying they were going to de-escalate tensions and restore security. What does that all mean, and how much of a chance does it have of actually happening? We're back with the panel. Charles.
It means very little when it occurs on a day when Putin refers to southern and eastern Ukraine as New Russia. Now, there's an interesting way to call this territory, as it was called in Tsarist times, and he mentioned specifically Kharkiv, Donetsk, and Odessa. If you look at the map, and this becomes New Russia, or if it's Finlandized, which means that these constitutional changes that we are now acquiescing to, and that Kiev is acquiescing to, completely loosens the bonds of this country. And all of these eastern and southern provinces are essentially autonomous and run by Russia. If that happens, what's left of Ukraine is a truncated state, landlocked, and a basket case, which Putin would be happy to be rid of and take all the other good stuff that's on the Black Sea. So when you hear him talking in this way, and Lavrov is signing a paper which is completely meaningless, because when he talks about illegitimate authorities and the gangs who have seized territory, he's talking about the government in Kiev and the seizure of the square in Kiev. So it can be interpreted either way. The paper is useless. The words that Putin is using are quite important.
Well, here's what Vladimir Putin said today about the possibility of using force.
I can remind you that Russia's Federation Council granted the president the right to use military force in Ukraine. I very much hope that I will not have to use that right.
Saying that he just doesn't want to be forced into having to go into Russia.
He doesn't have to have a full-scale invasion. He's doing very well, thank you, just fomenting this unrest, exposing the Ukrainian army as completely feckless. I think he's doing pretty good. But what really struck me about the president's statement is where he says, my hope is that we actually do see follow-through, but I think given past performances, we can't count on that. He was talking about Russia, but the way it came out, it was as if his European allies were not going to follow through. And I think that's really the big question. He keeps on talking about these additional consequences that we can impose on the Russians if we don't see any improvement. I don't think we've been seeing any improvement. It's actually going in the other direction. So now the question is the U.S. and, more importantly, the Europeans willing to take some kind of pain and sacrifice? If they impose real serious sanctions on Russia, it will hurt Europe and their economies.
Which they will not do.
It's
another day and another agreement and another demonstration that most agreements aren't worth the paper they never should have been written on in the first place. We have an agreement with Iran, and the centrifuges continue to spin and the enrichment continues of uranium. We have an agreement with Syria about something peripheral to the problem in Syria, which is the civil war. That is, chemical weapons, which suddenly became the distraction, frankly, from the real problem. And now we have an agreement on the Ukraine. The problem is, as Anne Applebaum, who's very wise at all times and lives in Warsaw, so she's there in Eastern Europe, says in the Washington Post today, it's a new kind of war. And F-16s are no use against thugs storming City Hall. So we need to find a new way, using broadcasters, soft power, all the rest, to try and counter this. But other than that, there's not much we can do.
We have a source in Kiev who says that those flyers that were saying that the Russian separatists were requiring Jewish people on the ground to register their property and register with the Russians were actually from pro-Ukrainian groups. But you can see that this whole place is a tinderbox and that all sides are stirring things up.
Which makes a mockery of the statement by Kerry and the president that we're going to help Putin to find a diplomatic solution. He doesn't want a
doesn't
solution.
want a solution.
He wants a problem. He created the problem. He's the one who's behind all the unrest. It didn't happen spontaneously. He doesn't want a solution. And he believes in a military option. If he has to, he'll use it. But he may not have to because there'll be such a feckless response from the West.
That